Dennis will take us on a tour, a virtual tour down to Southeast Oregon to look at the birds and some of the wildlife down there. Most of us in the audience know that Dennis is the author of many birding books, dragonfly books. He's a naturalist and expert on dragonflies around the world. He's a great continuing education person, as he's on, if you're a Facebook friend of his, you're constantly getting updates on local nature. He's even done Facebook posts on rats in his yard. You can make anything interesting, Dennis, even the least appealing of creatures like rats. But I'm looking forward to tonight's talk and going down to Southeast Oregon with you. On this screen here, you'll see there's some of the links to other places you can find Dennis, and one great one, he was recently interviewed by Ed Pullen on bird banter. So you can listen to that. It's podcast number 68 on bird banter. It's a great interview from just about a month ago, I think, Dennis, yeah, with Ed Pullen. You get to hear some of Dennis's latest things. A couple of books are in the works, and hopefully some travel.
Hopefully.
Well, Dennis, yeah. I won't. Oh, one more last thing. I heard that it is your birthday month, and the Scorpio in my house celebrates for the entire month. So I think we can start your birthday celebration tonight, and maybe at the end of the talk, we'll all collectively wish you a happy birthday.
Okay, and bear in mind, I'm a Sagittarius, so.
Oh, you're a Sag, okay. Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. I like Scorpios too.
I'm Scorpios and Scorpions, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly, right. Okay, share my screen. Here we go.
Yep, Dennis, it's all yours. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oops, I lost it.
Let's see, yeah.
How could that happen? I just clicked on share my screen.
That's okay. Elaine might be able to, there we go. Okay, I'm gonna sign off.
This good?
Excellent, Dennis. Thank you.
This is good? Okay, here we go. Thank you, Cynthia. You always give introductions that I love to hear. And I'm so glad to not be able to see everybody, but to have all of you here tonight with me, and a few more joining as I speak. This is a single trip to southeastern Oregon. Netta Smith, my wife, and I have been there many, many times over the years. We really like to go in May, and this was just a 2016 trip toward the end of the month that we made, that we really, really were lucky in finding so many neat things and getting so many photographs of them that I just made this up as a slideshow rather than making a slideshow of Southern Oregon that would be an amalgamation of all these many, many years. I just chose to show this one thing. So there are lots of things down there that we didn't see on this trip that you can bear in mind as well. So anyway, I'd like to start with just a little bit of introduction to the region. On the left is a map of the distribution of the big sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata. It's sort of an iconic shrub that occurs very widely in drier areas in the West. Its range is pretty extensive. It surprised me when I found this map, actually, but it sort of corresponds to the sagebrush biome, as it's called, which is on the right here. And in the Great Basin, which is largely in Nevada and Utah and Arizona, and pretty much it sometimes extends a little further north than that, I would say. And north of the Great Basin, north of the Great Basin sagebrush, which is basically a biome dominated by this big sagebrush plant, with lots of other plants growing with it, but it's a shrub biome. North of it, it's wetter. As you go farther north, it gets wetter and wetter. These are really dry deserts in the south. And so there's a lot of grassland interspersed with the sagebrush, and there are very dominant grasses that grow among the sagebrush. So it's a steppe region. A steppe is a grassland. So this area is called a sagebrush steppe because it's a combination of shrubs and grassland. And you can see it extends up into Washington. We go to the next slide here. You can see the same map. But now notice a physiographic map. This is a physiographic map of the Western North America, the Western United States. And notice one thing interesting about it, there's a bunch of flat areas. There's an awful lot of mountains and ridges and hills all through this very, very mountainous country, Western North America. But there's also some big flat areas, notice. Here's one up here, here's one. This is the Central Valley of California. Central Valley of California was once a beautiful environment with all sorts of interesting wetlands and grasslands. And now it's very, very largely agriculture. Fortunately, there's some good, big national wildlife refuges in this area. And so a lot of this, small parts of this have been preserved, but an awful lot of it has been lost to agriculture. This is a big flat area. It's easily, the tractors get around very easily in this area. It's very easy for big trucks. Water can be distributed very easily in big flat areas. And of course, it's just easy to make croplands, easy to plow, et cetera. So not so easy on a steep mountain slope. Here's another flat area, the Snake River Basin in southern Idaho. Same thing has happened there. A lot of the the natural vegetation has been lost to agriculture. Now we go a little bit further north and look in Washington, we have the same situation, a big, big flat area. When I came to Washington 52 years ago, I would say 50% of the Columbia Basin had been lost to agriculture. Now I believe the figure is closer to 90%. So this is not the area it used to be. This area used to have a lot of the same flora and fauna as you find very widely throughout this Great Basin area. Now it is very, very largely agriculture, and so it's really lost so much. So that's sort of one of the main reasons that we go to Oregon every spring. We can go down here into southern Oregon. This is not flat, it's hilly, it's high elevation. It's not, you can't easily pump water into there to make farmlands. You can't easily run tractors across this because there's so many hills. So this area has stayed really, it's got ranch land, it's got some farms. It's really stayed pristine compared to what has happened in these flat areas like the Columbia Basin. So you go into eastern Washington, Lincoln County over towards Spokane. This is the sort of view. You see huge areas of wheat and mustard and other crops grown in this vast land that used to be mostly sagebrush and grassland. Now, it turns out that orchards and growing fruit trees probably a lot more lucrative than growing grass and growing fruit crops. And so more and more and more of the Columbia Basin is being planted in orchards of apples and peaches and apricots and so forth. And this is making it even less like it used to be because it wasn't an area of trees. But now water can be pumped almost anywhere and you can grow trees. And not very many things live in these very, very monoculture orchards. In some of this land, like this photo in Douglas County, where east of the Columbia River, there are patches of habitat left. There's some slopes that are too steep to plow, some areas that just people have left as sagebrush or grassland, but they're not very big, so many of them, except those that are in refuges and preserves. And so you can imagine in a patch of sagebrush this size, there aren't going to be very many of the original flora and fauna living in something like that. And that's what's happened. Not only has the habitat been lost, but perhaps just as bad pesticides are applied just about everywhere because of the crop. And the pesticides kill off the insects that a lot of the birds and lizards creatures would have been eating there. But now you go into southern Oregon, same habitat originally, but still there. Big, extensive areas of sagebrush, big grassland areas, meadows, wetlands all over. And it's just as beautiful as it was hundreds of years ago, I think. So here's where we go when we go down there. We come down I-5 from Seattle, turn at Portland, go over to Gresham, and then get on Highway 26 here, which comes right by beautiful Mount Hood right next to it here, all the way down through the Warm Springs Reservation, down to Madras, down to Redmond, down to Bend, and then over to Riley and eventually Burns. And often our first night we go down there, we stay in a motel in Burns. And then the next day, then we'll have 3 or 4 days down there. We can drive from Burns down through the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, this area. If we want to French Glen, if we want all the way down to Fields, right down here in the Alvord Desert, which is here, an even drier, lower elevation desert than the sagebrush desert we have here. It's a very interesting country. If you want to stop in Sisters, you have a good chance of seeing Indian jays and white-headed woodpeckers in the ponderosa pine land there. Going in a little closer, a little more closely, here's the road cross from Bend to Burns. And we, as I say, we stop in Burns. And this is a fabulous, notice the water, notice the streams and ponds and lakes, and it's just an incredible amount of wetlands down here. And right around Burns and Hines is there's some cattle raising, there's a little bit of agriculture, but mostly just big grassy areas and lots of water. There's water in the ditches, there's ponds and lakes, And we just basically drive around here for an afternoon. You see all the birds you want just within a couple of miles of Burns, I think. But then the next day we start out on this highway, 205, south from Burns, and can drive down, see stuff all along the way here, go down between these lakes, Mallard Lake and Harney Lake, and go on down if you want French Glen here. We also go over to Diamond. We stay in the hotels in both Diamond and French Glen. And then we can go all the way down to Fields, which we did on this particular trip. Drawing in a little more closely yet, coming down from Burns here, you go by these lakes. Malheur Lake, when it's full of water, is also full of birds. But in drought years, it actually dries up completely. And at those times, there's almost nothing to be seen at this narrows area here between the lakes. But you can still, there are roads up in this farther north that you can drive off and find water, find ponds and so forth. And then we go from here over to the Refuge Headquarters, which are right here, and usually hang around. There's a lot of trees there. It's really nice at the Refuge Headquarters, very birdy areas, especially in migration. And then we can get on the Central Patrol Road and go all the way down through the refuge, down, down, down. Lots of water, lots of interesting habitat, all the way down through. You can see ponds all over. These Buena Vista ponds are wonderful. And if we want, we can go over to Diamond, either back, still Central Patrol Road, all the way down past the P Ranch, which is another really neat place to stop, and into French Glen. From French Glen, you can go up to Steen's Mountain later in the summer or down to Fields. So what do we see when we go down to all these places? Well, Highway 20 east of Riley, which is getting over toward Burns, pronghorns. There are pronghorns, quite a few. They're really pretty common there. When the alfalfa is growing in the spring, the pronghorns come out of the grassland and just love getting into the alfalfa and feeding on it. I don't know how much the alfalfa growers like them, but there they are, and often very, very near the road. Really neat to see. Lots of mammals to see down there. Belding's ground squirrel is a grassland ground squirrel. It's really, really common, and it in turn attracts raptors. There's areas where the ground squirrels are so common that you can see a couple of golden eagles as you drive through here. You can see, this is a golden eagle. You can see ferruginous hawks, Swainson's hawks, red-tailed hawks, prairie falcons, sometimes bald eagles even come in there to feed on these ground squirrels, ravens. So it's a really neat time to just watch that. You get to Hines, which is just next to Burns, and you can drive off the road at Hines down into some of these side roads and just go off into this beautiful meadow, moist meadowland with lots of water. And this particular spring, the giant camas was something like I had never seen before, just fields and fields of this beautiful, beautiful camas. Great egret over here, white-faced ibises here, and close up of the camas. I'm putting scientific names of the plants in case there's really any hardcore botanists here who would like to see and know those. Either both this and the common camas, you can watch fields of it for these little white ones. Everyone's maybe one in hundreds and hundreds of plants have no pigment. They're pure, they're albino plants, which is really cool. They still, of course, have chlorophyll pigment, so they can photosynthesize, but the flowers, I guess I should say, don't have any pigments. It's fun to watch for these white patches among the camas. And there's so many animals living about. This stuff is mule deer, very common down there. Probably this one may have been even grazing on the camas. Blackbirds, we see, there's still plenty of blackbirds left in eastern Washington because they do fairly well with humans because they feed in feedlots and grain fields and so forth. But blackbirds are really abundant around here. It's really fun. There's just red-winged blackbirds on every post and singing all around you, and yellow-headed blackbirds, which are much, much scarcer in eastern Washington now as a lot of the marshes have been drained. But they're still super abundant around Burns and in Malheur Refuge. And you see the males doing their displays on fences. It's just as you drive down the road, these are all along the roads. They're usually cattail ditches next to the roads, which are where these blackbirds are breeding. And again, Brewer's blackbirds are common there. You can compare their beautiful iridescence with the iridescence of white-faced ibises, which are something we see as a rarity in Washington, but which are just all over the place down there in Southern Oregon. There's a big breeding colony there, and the ibises wander far and wide that. And you see you get a lot of chances if you're a photographer to get more than one species in a photo because these birds are so common there. Here's a willet on the left and a long-billed curlew. This is just driving around these roadsides around Burns, and both quite common. The willets are often sitting on fence posts, and they'll jump off the fence post, fly through the air and give a courtship song while you're sitting there. Just beautiful, beautiful whistles that they make. They're showing their big black and white wings. And the long-billed curlews will come and check you out when you're standing on the road with your camera, because they may have a nest somewhere within 100 or 200 yards off of the grassland, and they just want to know what you're doing there. And so they give you a lot of wonderful chances for photos, calling all the time. And they'll even come down and sit on the road, stand on the road nearby and call at you some more. I've never found a long-billed curlew nest. They're supposed to be one of the hardest birds to find the nest, because both adults leave the nest when you're a long, long way from it, and they fly away and try to lead you away from it. So really, really difficult to find the nest of this bird. Snipes are on the posts doing their chirpy songs and going up in the sky and winnowing almost anywhere in the marshes there. If it's a spring, you're in sound view of Wilson snipes winnowing. A wonderful, wonderful song. And the marshes there are full of marsh wrens, and they're full of rails, Virginia rails, and the cattails, and sorers out in the grassy areas. And snakes. I know those of you who don't like snakes can look away, but I love snakes, and there are a lot of these garter snakes in the wetlands there. A western terrestrial garter snake that eats fishes and amphibians. Quite common. You got to watch. In fact, you have to watch on the road so you don't hit one crossing the road. And mammals. There's so many mammals down there. This is a muskrat, but we see them pretty regularly on trips down there. See a lot of mammals down there that aren't in this slideshow even, like coyotes. Night herons, black-crowned night herons, which I think have declined an awful lot in Washington since I've lived here, very common down there. They're, again, the standing along the road, the adults and the brown-streaked young ones. Shorebirds, just a welter of shorebirds right around birds. Their black-necked stilts are everywhere. This is a female with brown scapulars and tertials there. The males are solid black in those areas. They're really common. You stop your car in these marshy areas, and again, like the curlews, the black-necked stilts will come over and fuss at you, even though you're 100 yards from their nest. Avocets, American avocets nests are right along with the stilts, and killdeers are everywhere. This was an avocet nest we found on this trip, and sort of walked over just to check it out. Usual 4 eggs laid by a shorebird, beautiful nest. We wait a few minutes to get a couple of good distraction displays out of them, and they fly around a little bit, and then we very quickly retreat so we don't endanger the nest. In a nearby pond, we found both sexes there, the male in the front with a straighter bill, female with a more curved bill. You can actually sex American avocets if you can see their bills well. Birds were already feeding young. I assume that's why this brewer's blackbird is carrying a larva of some sort heading for a nest to feed its young. And again, the white-faced ibis are just always worth looking at. They're just a gorgeous bird and just so common down there. And there's a lot of other neat things to see. There's a lot of pasture land there with horses and some cattle farms as well. But even in these places where you see horses and cattle, there's always sagebrush and natural grassland all around. Ducks, tremendous numbers of ducks breed down there. Green-winged teal pair here. Cinnamon teals are very common. Blue-winged teals are also common. And if you're lucky, you may see some of the interactions of a pair of ducks that another male is trying to horn in, and you can see a real fracas between these male ducks chasing around trying to take a female away from another male. Pairs of northern pintails, so many ducks nests there. The diving ducks that here in Washington, well, we still see redheads in eastern Washington, but just a lot fewer than before, and we sometimes see them in migration when they're way out on a big lake or reservoir, not that easy to see. When they're in their breeding grounds, they're maybe swimming along very, very close to the road. Male and female redhead here, and a pair of canvasbacks here, lesser scoffs also breed there. South of Burns away, the road all of a sudden ascends, and you go across this big long ridge of basalt called Wright's Point. Very, very obvious on maps. If you stop there for a while, you may well find rock wrens or chuckers or bush tits up in the junipers. And then if you go all the way to the top and look off to the north, you see the flatlands between there and Burns. You can see there's a lot of green areas that are sort of pasture grass, but there's wetlands scattered in among them, lots and lots of sagebrush and other native vegetation all around these areas. And then you go off Wrights Point to the south, you're back in the flatland again. There's a big juniper tree on the west side of the road that's got a ferruginous hawk nest in it. It's been there for years. You don't want to get too close to scare them, but you can, if you have a telephoto lens, you can get nice photos. In this case, a female in the nest. And as we stood there, a young bird popped up and said, hey, I want to get in the pictures too. And burrowing owls, this road is a great road for burrowing owls. There's several burrows along it, and you just basically drive along and watch for the males so that are out in the daytime, scrutinizing the area, looking for potential predators or nest disturbers. And if you stop there for a few minutes, a female may appear as well. And a lot of people down there know where these birds are. You know, they know at the mile 14, there's a burrowing owl nest or something. And they've been there for years, so it's clear that the birders stopping there are not dissuading them from nesting, not scaring them away. Go farther down, you go between the two lakes crossing, you go down to where the road to the refuge headquarters goes off to the east. If you go west there instead on a dirt road, and very shortly you'll see these line of cliffs, and up on these cliffs there's been a golden eagle nest for many, many years. And it's fairly easy to, this is a telephoto lens, of course we're still fairly far away, fairly easy just to watch the young when they're in the nest. You can actually see adults come in and feed them. We didn't see that today, but if you stand there long enough and you start to look up long enough, all of a sudden an adult will come check you out. There's a lot of interesting plants there, desert plants, many of which occur in Washington as well. This is the hop sage, Greya spinosa. It's actually, these are the fruits of this particular plant. There are flowers around as well as butterflies, checking them out. It's still a little early in the spring, but there are some butterflies. A western white here feeding on a fiddleneck. Those little spines on the fiddleneck are poisonous, just like nettles spines. So you've got to be careful when you're around them. And all the birds of the sagebrush are here, just about the birds that we still see in eastern Washington, but they're just getting harder and harder to find. You have to go to just certain areas if you want to see these typical common sagebrush birds like sage thrasher, vesper sparrow, and brewer sparrow. These are probably three of the common sagebrush breeding passerine birds in Washington, and they're very common down here. One thing I see as I put together these photos is every bloody bird is on a fence wire. It's just amazing. And that's why these are relatively secretive birds, and you don't see them that easily. But when the males are singing in the spring, a barbed wire fence wire seems to be just about as good a place to sing from as the top of a sagebrush. So as you drive along these roads, that's where the birds are, is on these fences. Of course, that's where you see them. That's where you can photograph them. Doesn't mean everything is fenced everywhere, but it's a place you can photograph birds. Shrikes, loggerhead shrikes are still very common down there. They declined hugely in Washington, but there's still, we still have all these birds in the Columbia Basin, just getting harder to find. And rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are still in the Columbia Basin, quite common in southern Oregon. You do have to watch yourself, especially if you're walking around rocky areas. Western rattlesnakes are not very aggressive. They're unlikely to bite, but they can, and you wouldn't want that to happen. But snakes are just absolutely gorgeous animals, in my opinion, and we love seeing them. Anytime we see them, we just stop and admire them and photograph them. And some of them don't make it across the road, unfortunately. This is a gopher snake, actually, not a rattlesnake, that this turkey vulture has found and is dining on. Lots and lots of wetlands, lots of marshes and ditches and canals, and with reeds and grasses and cattails. It's full of birds. Birds like American coots. This one is actually displaying. And double-crested cormorants. There's a breeding colony of those not terribly far from the refuge headquarters. You can drive right up to it and watch the birds. Beautiful emerald eyes this species has. Caspian terns, there's colonies of those on Malheur Lake. I don't know if they breed every year or not, but you can usually see them there. And you can stop in groves of willows along the road and look up at Steen's Mountain to the east there, which is, again, this is in late May. Steen's Mountain is still very snowy. The road actually goes up to about 10,000 feet. It's a spectacular drive to take in the midsummer in July. We often go up there when we go down in July, excuse me, and lots of interesting flowers up there and a lot of interesting birds as well. But along these willow groves, we can find the birds that breed locally, like yellow warblers, Bullock's orioles, very common down there. Song sparrows. The song sparrows are an interior subspecies, which looks pretty different from the ones we have around in our yards in Western Washington. A little bit smaller, much more brightly marked. Eastern kingbirds everywhere down there along the road. There's a lot of willows, a lot of water, which Eastern kingbirds like. And then some of the dry areas, there are a lot of Western kingbirds, so both species there. Notice the narrowed outer primaries. It indicates this is probably a male. Swallows everywhere. They like the water. There's nesting sites for them. Barn swallows are common. Violet green swallows are common where there are nesting places for them in trees or in bird boxes. Beautiful male here. Rough-winged swallows are common. Bank swallows are common. Cliff swallows are common. Don't have any photos of those in this show. And as I said, snakes are common. This is Page Springs Campground. I forgot to mention this when I was talking about places to stay. You can stay in hotels and, as I say, French Glen or Diamond, or camp at the Page Springs Campground. It's a tract of junipers. Very interesting long-eared owls nest there, usually lots of birds there, and snakes like this gopher snake. Don't worry, they're not coming into your sleeping bag every night. Magpies are there, black-billed magpies. And another corvid we saw there, which surprised us, American crow. Crows are quite uncommon down there. We only see them occasionally around the French Glen Hotel. This one was, I think, a straggler at Page Springs. It's the only one I've seen out in that area. It's probably a young bird. It's got very worn feathers in the spring. Probably not breeding. Bush tits. There are a lot of bush tits there in the junipers, and they're the Eastern Oregon subspecies, very much grayer than what we get here in Seattle and Western Washington. If you go to the Potholes Reservoir in Eastern Washington, there's a small population of these gray bush tits there that have come up from Oregon. Oh, and dragonflies. This is when we go in the summer, we see lots of dragonflies, but May is just too early for them. This is the first dragonfly of the spring, a just emerged California darner that we found hanging up there at Page Springs. And French Glen Hotel is a wonderful place to stay. You can stay in the hotel. They've got some relatively new cabins out back, and there's usually a lot of birds there. It's a very, very birdy place in migration, and quite a few birds breed there. Butterfly that was in the yard, a ochre ringlet that we saw there. Again, very few butterflies on that trip. We've seen a lot more on some summer trips. And house wrens breeding, and I don't know what they made this birdhouse for, but it looks like a woodpecker has enlarged it. This particular visit, it was being nested in by a house wren, and maybe not a very bright house wren. This one flew in. See, you can't get any laughs when you're doing it on Zoom. Or GoToMeeting. That's a terrible thing. This one flew in and tried for quite a while to push this little twig into the nest, failed to do so, and then dropped it. Apparently, it just couldn't quite figure out a way to turn its head and a way to get it in. So birds do have bird brains after all. California quail, quite common down there along the road. Great horned owls, they nest, as a pair of those nest right at French Glen. I'm almost guaranteed to see them there. They sit out right in the broad daylight. They seem to have no fear of anything. And if you look around enough, you very often see one. The great horned owls in eastern Washington and Oregon are much paler than those in the western part of the states. Rabbits, lots of nuttall's, cottontails, right? This is right on the grounds of the hotel. If you drive around in the evening, especially, you see a lot of them and a lot of black-tailed jackrabbits. When I came to Washington, black-tailed jackrabbits were common in the Columbia Basin. Now I just never see them out there. There may still be some, but they seem to be another species that's so largely disappeared. A white-tailed jackrabbit of the grasslands has become even rarer as an endangered species in Washington now. Yellow-bellied marmots are all over the place as soon as you get to rocky areas. Lots and lots of cliffs along the main road south from Burns to French Glen, and there's most of them, if you stop and look, you'll see yellow-bellied marmots on the rocks. Great egrets in the ditches and the wetlands, they're everywhere. This is in the spring. This is in full breeding plumage. The upper mandible gets black and the lower is turned lime green, and they only have that color just for a few weeks. Sandhill cranes. Sandhill cranes are common breeders in wetlands in the refuge. You can hear them calling. You can scope the wetlands, or sometimes you'll see a pair very, very close to the road. They breed right around burns too. Mule deer, as I said, are everywhere. This is a buck in velvet in the spring. Those antlers will grow for a little, maybe a little more. The velvet will drop off and they'll be nice and shiny and pointed in this fall when they're competing for mates. Now this is the road out to Diamond. We love this road. It's really good for wildlife. You leave the main road and head east to Diamond. And this particular spring was an amazing abundance of white-faced ibis. I'd never seen so many as we did on this trip. Hundreds of them. Everywhere you look, you'd turn your head, there'd be a flock flying west, and there's another flock over there flying east. And this flock just landed on the road for some reason. Just wonderful creatures. And then there's ponds along, this is along the Diamond Road, there's ponds along there. And you think, what is this creature? It's a black tern that's dived into the water and come up with an insect larva. Lots of black terns there. Lots of Wilson's phalaropes. Any sort of wetland there, very commonly see a pair or two of Wilson's phalaropes in the spring and through the summer. Savannah sparrows, this is a moist grassland. So unlike the sagebrush birds, the brewers and vesper sparrows, you get into this moist grassland, and the Savannah sparrow is the dominant species here. Bobolinks along this road is a great place for bobolinks. They breed here and in several other places around the refuge, and you see the males sitting on the wires, and you can see them doing their aerial display flights, singing like crazy as they fly. A wonderful bird. And out to the Hotel Diamond, another, I think we like staying at that even more than the French Glen Hotel, because it's almost feels like it's more out in the wild. And sometimes I've been here in the evening, and it's just, the air resounds with the winnowing of Wilson's snipes. Snipes is just a fantastic place to stay. So this is a copper rose that's planted on the ground that I particularly liked. And great horned owls, there's another pair of great horned owls breeds right next to this hotel. You can see them sitting out in the grass and weeds, or sometimes they're just right up on the building. This is a young bird that was on top of one of the buildings that the adult came in. This is in the daytime, not at night. The adult came in and perched by it. Then you can drive from French Glen down to Fields, and you go by this long Catlow Valley. It's a beautiful valley. There's some wetlands along it, lots of things to see there. This is 6 Mile Lake, a nice lake you can stop at. I guess a train was crossing the road or something there. And anyway, Forster's terns breed there as they do in some other parts of the refuge. Silvery white wings fly around. And this meadowlark flew across the road right while we were standing there. They're very common, wonderful. In the spring, again, you just hear there's songs almost everywhere through the refuge. And lark sparrows aren't as common as some of the others, but they're pretty much guaranteed to be seen somewhere along one of these roads. Again, sorry, sitting on wires. I know they sit on shrubs a lot, but you don't get the beautiful photos of them when they're on a shrub, half of them hidden by the leaves. And a lot of flowers at this time of the year, especially as you go down south of French Glen toward through the Catlow Valley and up over the mountains to Field. These are lupins. You know, there's a cursor, lupins and flax in this photo. And then this golden pea, which we found very common there, Thermopsis montana. I don't see those in very many places, but they were quite common in this moist grassland. And if you love horses, there are a lot of horses in this valley. You can see herds of them along the road. Also pronghorns. You can see horses and pronghorns both in the just right near the road in this beautiful valley. And then you go over a little mountain range and down to Fields, which is the Fields Station, is a famous place. I think it has the best milkshakes in Oregon, probably in the Pacific Northwest, maybe in the world, for all I know. Just if you go to Fields, you've got to stop. And there's a nice restaurant there, but they weren't open at this time of year. It was too early for them to close in the winter. They also have a couple of cabins there. You can stay there, which is a really neat place to stay. And you have to make reservations way in advance. So same is true, by the way, for the French Glen and Diamond hotels. There's not very many rooms, and a lot of people like to go visit there. Best probably to go during the week if you can. But there are a lot of migrants. There's an oasis at Fields. You can walk through, there's a trail through it, big cottonwood trees. And if you go there in migration, it's just always full of interesting birds. Many, many, many of the real rare birds that have been found, rare for Oregon, have been found at this oasis in Fields. We didn't find anything like that at this visit, although I did see a black-throated blue warbler there, I think the year before. Anyway, there's a western wood pewee and a dusky flycatcher, a warbling vireo. I don't think any of these breed there. I think they're all migrating through. Townsend's warbler, we know that doesn't breed there. That's a conifer breeder. Black-chinned hummingbird, that may breed there. It probably does. Didn't see a male, but we saw a female. And out behind the oasis, you can walk out into the desert areas, and there's an old farm building or ranch building there that's kind of neat. But we always go out there because of the lizards. It's the best place I know of to see western whiptails, which is right at the northern end of its range right there. And the same with these leopard lizards. They're right at the northern end of their range. This is a pair indulged in some kind of interesting behavior. Beautiful, beautiful. These are big lizards. These are a foot long, really, and they're terrestrial. They run around the ground. And if you just stand still, sometimes they let you get pretty close to them. And then we drove out to the east of Fields. You can go out into the Alvord Desert on a road that goes by these big power poles, and there was a raven. I've seen several raven nests there. This was a raven nest that we stopped at on this particular visit. And snakes all over the place. Again, this is a gopher snake. They can be very, very aggressive. They try to mimic a rattlesnake. They flatten their head and they rattle their tail, even though they don't have a rattle on the end of it. And here's sort of an imaginative way to photograph a snake that's crawling towards you with a camera with a pretty good depth of field. And a pretty cool photo, I thought. And the little streams come down to these roads coming off Steen's Mountain. All that snow has to melt at some time, so it forms streams that come down. Some of them end in little wetlands. And in this valley, there's the big cattle ranches. This is the Alvord Valley. And the Alvord Lake itself, a dry lake that people race cars across. We were amazed to see the amount of people camping there with their honey buckets and everything. Big dry lake. But we went, you can go all through this valley. It's not a sagebrush valley. It's actually full of greasewood. Greasewood grows in saltier, more alkaline soil than sagebrush. And that's what sort of dominates this Alvord Desert. But see, there is sagebrush in the background as well. This is full of lizards, snakes, sagebrush sparrows, more sage thrashers, beautiful flowers like this evening primrose, and this beautiful, beautiful paintbrush that grows there. And more snakes, another western rattlesnake. Get a close up of the rattle. You know, the rattles, they grow these rattles every time they shed their skin. They keep one of the tips scales. They don't shed that tip scale. And so they add one every time they shed their skin. And they usually shed their skin a couple of times in a summer. And so you can sort of age a rattlesnake by how many rattles they have. And sometimes they lose them from the end as well, though. And this is just a beautiful adaptation, like that gopher snake. Gopher snake vibrates its tail to potentially scare something. The rattlesnake can rattle like that and really give a good warning. It's obviously totally a defense mechanism. They certainly don't want to rattle and warn their prey away. But they are dangerous snakes. And so along with that has come the evolution of this ability to actually warn that they are dangerous. This is Mickey Hot Springs. There's several hot springs in this Alvord Valley, and some of them, the stream that flows from them cools off and supports really interesting dragonflies. The only place in Oregon where a number of kinds of dragonflies are known to occur. Again, it was too early in the season for them on this particular trip, but we did find beautiful wet salt tiger beetles running around on the sand there. And everywhere we go, there's flocks of white-faced ibis flying by. And this is now out on the Diamond Road again. And mourning is some of the birds we see along there. Mourning doves are pretty common there. Eurasian collared doves are common only right around ranches. They're a bird that just does not seem to like the wild very much. But if you get around where people are living, you can find them pretty readily. Starlings, so it's late enough in the summer now where the first starling juveniles are off their nests making their harsh calls, just to show that breeding is very successful there. And there are enough people living out there where there are birds like sparrows and starlings and collared doves, but mostly it's pretty wild. Killdeer is breeding everywhere there. They're all along the road, nesting in the gravel along the road, doing nice distraction displays if you just stop your car to look at them. And Franklin skulls, I didn't show any more photos of this because we didn't see that many on this trip. Sometimes we go down there and we literally see hundreds of Franklin skulls, a species that doesn't breed in Washington. Beautiful, beautiful small gull. That's like the white-faced ibis. That's very, very common down there. And a female common merganser was on a little river. We just stopped the car and watched her. And she sat there watching us for a while, and she said, well, these people might be dangerous. Maybe I better take my little babies off and hide from them. And so there she went, leading this little flotilla of young after her. Just a wonderful thing to see sort of toward the end of this trip. And then driving back down the Diamond Road, the last interesting bird we saw was a young peregrine falcon, which is a real surprise, the only peregrine falcon I've ever seen out there. But this is a non-breeding bird, and there it was. So anyway, thank you for your patience. It's been nice talking to you.